Hello, so now that we explained what we want from the help screen, let's go ahead and build it. So here is our help screen that we set up, and it currently doesn't have anything. We need to first add the instructions. The instruction will be static text that we can add inside a label. So let's take a label from the object library in the utility area and add a label to the help screen. I'm gonna resize the label to make it fit, to make the instructions fit. And don't forget, with the label, the height is not enough. You have to also change the number of lines. I'm gonna make maybe 8 lines here. And you can change the font size, the font type, the alignment, as well as the color. So I'll add some instructions. The game has 3 turns. Then you can add new lines by pressing Control and Enter, and this adds a new line. So the game has 3 turns. Click the Start Game button to start. You will hear a sound. Click the button that corresponds to the note that you heard. Get it all right and you win. Make sure to practice here in the help section. To view stats, click on the stats section. So that's all. Hit tab to apply this to the label, and you can see that everything fits, and you can change the color if you want, make it blue, or make any adjustment to the instructions. You don't have to do it all in one label. You can do it in more than one label as well. The menu bar has also a title. So in the title I can say help, and it adds a help screen title here for us. So that's our help screen, and since we added the instructions, let's test the app and make sure that everything works fine where it is. We'll wait for the app to load in the simulator. Here is the app. We go to help, and here are the instructions, and then you can go back to the game screen. The next step that we want in the help screen is related to allowing the user to practice the sound of the note. This requires multiple parts. First, we need to add a button so the user can click on. Second, we need to load the actual note files, the actual MP3 files into our project. And third, we need to import the framework that has the AVAudioPlayer. So let's start first by loading the files into our project. To add any file to the project, any resource file, I mean, like music file or image files and so on, you can click on File, Add Files to the project, or you can drag them into the project. So I'll say Add Files to Project. I have the notes here in the download folder, and you can download the notes file from the project folder, from the assignment section on Blackboard. And if you're watching this not in a class, you can upload any MP3 files and use them in the app. You can select the folder and try to upload the folder. Click Options. When you click Options, you can choose to copy items if needed, and you should copy items if needed. All the files need to be copied into your project folder so you can carry the project with you. You can then collect all the files into a group. So since I'm loading a collection of files inside a folder, I can put them in my project either as a group here. A group meaning it's a logical grouping in the project explorer, and a folder mean it's an actual physical folder on the project. So I'm just gonna say group. If you choose actual physical folder, it will affect the path to the file when you need it. So I'll just say create groups and then add. Oops, I added the wrong file. That's not the one I wanted to add. So remove reference and then try again, file, add files to project, and it's in the downloads, and I need to select this, options, copy items if needed, and then add. So here is the notes group, and if you open it, you see all the note files. Now notice this is just a logical grouping, and the actual notes are stored in the project folder. So if you go to where our project is stored, so this is where I'm trying to find where the project is. Sorry about that. So you see here are the notes folder, and here they are. All right. So now that we have the actual music files, the second part is the AVAudioPlayer class. If you go to Window and Documentation and search for AVAudioPlayer, it tells you that the AVAudioPlayer is located in a framework called AVFoundation framework. The framework is like a folder that groups together class libraries or libraries, and the Xcode automatically loads one folder called Foundations. If you go to the help view controller, you see this keyword import, and what comes after it, I mentioned this before, it's a framework for the user interface kit that has all the class libraries that start with UI, user interface. There is another library called Foundation, but that foundation that has the definition of float, string, and so on, this is imported by default. But the single view template that we used to create the project imports the UI kit automatically for us. Now that AV Foundation, we have to import it ourselves. The most recent Xcode, when you say import a framework, it automatically adds the framework to the project. But to add a framework to your project, you go to the configuration file, and towards the end you see linked frameworks and libraries. If you click on the plus to add a framework or a library, you're able to add both the frameworks inside the iOS library and also any external library that you want to add to your project. So you click plus, and you see here a list of all the iOS libraries that you can add. There's also add other, where you can, if you downloaded a library from an external resource, you can click add other and browse to where the library is and add that library. The AV Foundation framework is here, so you can select the AV Foundation and say add, and as I mentioned, you do not need to do that with the most recent version of Xcode, but the earlier version you have to do that. Then we go to the help view controller, and we add the import statement. We say import, and we want to import the AV Foundation. By importing the AV Foundation, we have access to all the AV classes, including the AVAudioPlayer that we need to load the project. Back to the storyboard, I need to add a button so the user can click and listen to the notes. I'm gonna start and try to get the A button to work, and then we'll look at the rest of them. So I'm just gonna focus here on trying things first. So I'm gonna add one button first, and I'm gonna say this is the A note. Notice that I am linking the button with the actual file using the name of the note. The name of the note is the text on the button. It's also the name of the file. This is very important because you have to find a mechanism to link each one of those MP3 files to each one of the buttons. By using the text, the name of the note on the text of the button and on the file name will make that link almost straightforward and automatic for us. Now that you have the button, we want to do something similar to what we did in previous modules. The user will click on the button and we want the app to respond. The response of the app will be to load the a.mp3 file and play that sound. So first we need to create a function and connect to that function as an action with that button. So to do that, we bring in the assistant editor. So I'm gonna hide my utility area to make some room. Click the assistant editor so you can see the help view controller.swift file where you have the controller for the help screen and the help screen from the storyboard next to one another. So I want to connect this button to an action function. I don't currently have any action functions inside the help view controller, so I will need to create a new one. You can create a new one by typing it, or you can drag and let Xcode create it for you. And that's what we will do. So select the button, press the control key, drag from the button to the help screen, to the class, to the view controller class, and release. The type of connection is outlet, action, outlet connection. So we're gonna choose action. Then you provide the name of the function. So I'm gonna call it play note. This is a function that will play the note. Then you have the arguments. In the arguments, you have the option to choose no argument, the sender, or the sender and event. In the previous modules, I asked you to select none because we didn't need any of those. In this particular instance, we're gonna need the sender. The sender means that when the user click on the button, the operating system will identify the component that the user clicked on and pass to the function a reference to that component. So if you need those buttons for one reason or the other, so in this case we want the text on the button, you can send a reference to the button to the function. You can also send the event itself, information about the event, like the time, for instance, the name of the event. I'm not gonna need the event for anything, but I will need a reference to the button. In previous projects, we did not connect to the argument, but and to use the button, we had to make the button an outlet. I mentioned that in order to access any attributes in the user interface component, you need to make it as an outlet so you can send the data back and forth. That is correct still, but the outlet makes the component available to any function in your class. In this case, I only want the component to be available to my play note function that I will create. No other function needs it, so passing it as an argument will suffice. So we'll make the argument sender. Now, once you select an argument, the type becomes important. So by default, the type is generic, any object. But if you click the drop down, you'll see that Xcode recognizes that you are selecting a button. So it will say, do you want any object or do you want the actual type? I need the actual type. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to cast the any object or change the any object type into the UI button. So I will select UI button as a type. So the action connection says I'm asking Xcode to create a new function, connect that function as an interface builder action to this particular user interface component button, pass to the function one argument. The name of the argument is sender, and the type of this argument is UI button. Now connect. So you see here Xcode created a function. The name of the function play note. The function receives one argument. The name of the argument is sender. Colon to specify the type. The type is button. So at this thing inside this function, anytime you want to pass data or receive data from the button, you use the reference sender. Sender here is a reference to the memory location by this button. It's kind of a local outlet. The concept of an outlet is that we have a reference to the button all the time inside the class. This is a local outlet. You have a reference to the button only inside this particular function at the instance when the button is clicked. So that's the function. So what I did, I created imported the AVFoundation, added the node files, added a button, connected the button to a function. So what is left now is to program this function to respond. And the response that the function needs is to, once the user click on the button, to play the sound of that particular note. To give myself some more room, I'm going to switch back to the regular editor and go to the help view controller.swift. I don't need the project explorer at this time, so I'm going to hide it to make some room. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit so you can see the play note button in the middle of the screen. The play note button will need to do the following steps. First, it needs to retrieve the name of the note from the text of the button, because the name of the note is the file name. Then it needs to get a reference to the MP3 file that corresponds to the note. Now, how am I mapping both of them? I'm using the name of the file to be the same as the text on the button. So I can take the name of the node directly from the text and pass it on as the name of the file. Then I need to initialize the audio player object and then play the sound. To retrieve the note from the text of the button, if you look at the API documentation for UI button, there is a function there that can give you the title. So I will say let, and instead of naming this reference the file name, the note name, I'm gonna use file name, because I know that the note name is gonna be the same as the file name. So I'm gonna create a memory location and I'm say this is the file name for memory. I want to access the button. Sender, the reference sender is a reference to the button that was clicked. And if you click on it, there is a function called title label, I mean. And the title label is a label, so I can reuse it to access the text property of the label of the button. So you can think of it, the button itself has a label component on top of it, and now we're accessing the text from that label. So that gives me the name of the file here. And that gives us a string, so I'll add an exclamation mark so that the string, because the text function, if you noticed, the text function returned a string with a question mark, so add exclamation mark here. Then getting a reference to the file itself. I remind you we did that in project 1, in module 1 and in module 3, we first need to get a reference to the app bundle, then use that reference to get a path to the file. So I'll say let app bundle, and that's a reference name for the memory location that will contain the reference to the app bundle or the app folder. And I will say nsBundle.main bundle. We've used this function several times, and this function gives us a reference to the directory where the current application is located on the device. Then we can get the file path. We used it in the past to get the file path, but before I do this, let's take a quick look at the API documentation for the AVAudioPlayer. You can see in the tasks there is initializing an audio player, configuring and controlling, managing information about the sound, and using the audio lib. In initializing the AVAudioPlayer object, there are different ways to initialize. One of them is the contents of URL. If you click on that, this is similar to the initialization function we used for the NSArray in module 1 and NSDictionary in module 3. The difference is this function does not use a string to represent the path to the file. It uses another object called NSURL. The NSURL is a class library similar to a string, but it represents a file URL, not a string file path. So it's like file : / and then the path, whereas the path will start from / or C : / depending on your root directory on your file structure. So because this takes NSURL and there isn't another one that takes a string, to retrieve the actual path to the file, we want to retrieve it as a URL, not as a string. So I'll create a reference called letFileURL, then use the app bundle. In the previous modules, we used a function called path4resource, the path4resource that gives us a string. Here we're gonna use a similar function, but instead of returning a string, it returns NSURL type and it's called URL4resource. URL4resource has the name and the extension. If you put the notes inside a directory, you can provide the directory name here as a string. So you'll use the URL4resource with a directory and provide the name of the directory. So here I don't think I have a directory, so I'll just use that. And you need to put the name, and the name needs to be a string. So in previous project I knew the file name. Here I don't know the file name. I want to open whatever file that the user click on, and the name of the file is the same as the text on the button. So I put the text in this file reference, so I use that to instead of a file name or to pass on the file name. Then the extension, because all the files have the same extension, so we'll put the extension MB3, and that's gonna open that file or give us the URL to the location of that file. Now that I have the URL, I can initialize the audio player object. So I need to create the audio player. You can create it locally or create it with a class scope. So I'm gonna create the audio player with a class scope. So I will say var, and I'm gonna call it player : AVAudioPlayer and exclamation mark, because I'm not gonna initialize it here. If you do not have import AVFoundation, if you forgot to do that, Xcode will give you an error that it does not recognize AVAudioPlayer. So make sure you import the AVFoundation. Now that I created the player object, I can initialize it. So I'll say player equal AVAudioPlayer and parentheses to access the initialization functions. AVAudioPlayer contents of URL, and it needs an NSURL, and I have the NSURL here. You see next to it here, this is a new keyword called throws. The keyword throws is related to error handling, and to learn more about it, you can look at the Swift programming language error handling, or the try catch or exception handling mechanism in the Swift programming language. What it basically does, it notifies whoever is using this function that this function can stop the execution of the program and throw an error. So by knowing that, you need to capture that error or suppress it so that the application does not stop if the error situation occurs. So I'm not gonna get into the error handling, and I'm not gonna catch it, so I'm gonna suppress that error. So to suppress the error, before I type AVAudioPlayer, I'm gonna type the keyword try followed by exclamation mark and then the AVAudioPlayer initializer, contents of URL, and then we're gonna use file URL. I forgot in the file URL file for resource to add the exclamation mark at the end, so we add that here. And now we initialize the player with the content of this URL. The AVAudioPlayer, if you look at in the API documentation, supports a wide variety of audio files. So now that you have the audio player, you can play the sound. So we say player.play, and the play function plays the sound. So these are the instructions. Get the text from the button, get a URL for the actual file using the reference to the bundle, initialize the audio player, and we introduced this new keyword try exclamation mark to suppress the error when a function is throwing an error, and then the player play. So let's test this. And make sure your sound is on. We go to help, click the A, and you hear the sound. So now we got the first button, and it plays the sound of the A sound. So let's go ahead and add the rest of the buttons. So I need to add a button for every node that I have here. So I opened both of them next to me. So I have A sharp, B, and so on and so forth. So I'll add another button, and you can organize them any way you want. Make sure that the name of the text on the button is exactly the same as the name of the file, no spaces, and case sensitive, because I'm gonna use that to open the file. And if you make a mistake in the text, like add a space or change the case sensitivity, if they did not match what the file has, when you try to initialize the file, the audio player with the content of the file, you're gonna get an error. So I am organizing them in rows, 4 by row. You can also, if you are comfortable, you can copy the buttons. You don't have to keep adding new ones. Align them and change the color. You can also change the background color and of the help screen and make it look nice. So now that you added all the buttons, remember for the user to practice the sound of the note, you have to click on each note button. When you click on the note button, it activates or it triggers the function play note. So currently the function play note is connected only to the A button. So I need to connect this to all the other buttons. You can then click on the second button, control, drag from the second button to the function. See, we're not dragging to insert, we're dragging to connect. So you can see that it is connecting to the actual function and the whole function is highlighted. So now you release. If you hover over it, now you can see both buttons are connected to the function. Another way to connect to the button, when you hover over that circle, you see a plus sign. So you can drag from the plus sign over the button like that and connect with the button. So now all three, and keep doing that until you connect all 12 buttons to the function. You may have started to appreciate how the power of connecting an argument or sending the button that was pressed as an argument to the function, because now I don't need to do anything else. Once you click any of the other buttons, the operating system will capture that button and send it as an argument to the play note, and the play note will grab the text on the button and play the sound. So here you go. All the buttons now are playing, and the user can practice the sound of each one of those buttons as they please. We also learned how to play a sound, how to load the content of an MP3 into our file, and how to play the sound. And at this point, that concludes everything we need in the help screen. Clean it up, make it look nice, add other things if you would like. And that completes this iteration, and we have the help screen done. So we'll move to the game screen and start building the actual game states.